The raid on Manila of January 1798 was a Royal Navy false-flag military operation during the French Revolutionary Wars intended to scout the strength of the defenses of Manila, capital of the Spanish Philippines, capture a Manila galleon and assess the condition of the Spanish Navy squadron maintained in the port. Spain had transformed from an ally of Great Britain in the War of the First Coalition into an enemy in 1796. Thus, the presence of a powerful Spanish squadron at Manila posed a threat to the China fleet. An annual convoy of East Indiaman merchant ships from Macau in Qing Dynasty China to Britain, which was of vital economic importance to Britain. So severe was this threat that a major invasion of the Spanish Philippines had been planned from British India during 1797, but had been called off following the Treaty of Campo Formio in Europe and the possibility of a major war in India between the British East India Company and the Kingdom of Mysore. To ensure the safety of the merchant ships gathering at Macau in the winter of 1797–98, the British commander in the East Indies, Rear Admiral Peter Rainier, sent a convoy to China escorted by the frigates HMS Sybil and HMS Fox and commanded by Captain Edward Cook. After completing his mission, Cook decided to investigate the state of readiness of Spanish forces in Manila himself. He was also intrigued by reports that a ship carrying treasure was due to sail from Manila, which would make a valuable prize. Sailing in Sybil and accompanied by Captain Pulteney Malcolm in Fox, Cook reached the Spanish capital on the 13th of January 1798. Anchored in Manila Bay, Cook pretended that his ships were French vessels and successfully lured successive boatloads of Spanish officials aboard, taking them prisoner in turn. Once he had determined from his captives the state of defenses in Manila, that the treasure ship had been unloaded at Cavite and that the Spanish squadron was undergoing extensive repairs and thus unavailable for operations, he sent a raiding party against a squadron of gunboats in the mouth of the Pasig River, capturing the gunboats in a bloodless attack. Cook then released his prisoners and sailed southwards, unsuccessfully assaulting Zamboanga before returning to Macau. Background: in 1796, after 3 years of the French Revolutionary Wars, Spain and the French Republic signed the Treaty of San Ildefonso. The secret terms of this treaty required Spain to renounce its alliance with Great Britain and subsequently to declare war on its former ally. In the East Indies, this shift of political allegiance meant that the dominant British forces in the region were faced with the threat of attack from the Spanish Philippines to the east. Britain dominated the East Indies in 1796, controlling the trade routes through the Indian Ocean from the ports of Bombay, Madras and Calcutta. Dutch Ceylon, the Dutch Cape Colony and parts of the Dutch East Indies had been captured in 1795, and the French presence in the region had been confined to Isle de France and a few subsidiary islands in the western Indian Ocean. Some of the most important trade routes began at Canton and Macau in Qing Dynasty China. Early in each year, a large convoy known as the China Fleet, composed of large East Indiaman merchant ships in the employ of the British East India Company, sailed westwards to Europe from Macau laden with tea and other commercial cargo. This convoy was economically significant to Britain. One convoy in 1804 was valued at over £18 million. In January 1797, the convoy had been attacked by the French squadron in the East Indies, comprising 6 frigates commanded by Contre-Amiral Pierre Céacute Sar Charles de Cersei. In the ensuing Bali Strait incident, their commander deceived Cersei into believing that the unescorted convoy contained disguised ships of the line, and the French admiral retreated, only learning of his error on his return to Isle de France. There was considerable concern in India that Cersei might try again in 1798, or that the Spanish, who maintained a powerful squadron at Cavite, might make an attempt of their own. Rainier's initial impulse on learning in November 1796 of the impending declaration of war between Britain and Spain was to draw up plans for a major invasion of the Philippines, centered on Manila in repetition of the successful British capture of Manila in 1762. Cooperating with the Governor-General of India Sir John Shaw, and Colonel Arthur Wellesley among others, a substantial naval and military forces were earmarked for the operation, which was in the advanced planning stages, when unexpected news arrived in India in August 1797 announcing the Treaty of Campo Formio, which brought the War of the First Coalition to an end. Britain now faced France and Spain alone, while emissaries from the Tipu Sultan of the Kingdom of Mysore, an old opponent of Britain in southern India, were seeking French assistance with a renewed outbreak of hostilities. The resources planned for the operation against Manila were therefore retained in India and the operation cancelled. But the protection of the China fleet was still essential, and Rainier diverted some of his squadron eastwards to China. A number of merchant ships had gathered at Bombay in the spring of 1797 in preparation for the trip to Macau to load trade goods and join the China fleet. To escort this force, Rainier provided the 40-gun frigate HMS Sybil, captured from the French at the Battle of Mykonos in 1794, and the 50-gun HMS Centurion, which sailed with the convoy in July, taking passage through the Straits of Malacca, joined by the ships of the line HMS Victorious and HMS Trident, and the 32-gun frigate HMS Fox under Captain Pulteney Malcolm for the final voyage to Macau. The convoy arrived without incident on the 13th of December 1797, although the crews had been substantially weakened by tropical illnesses. Cook's raids. Reconnaissance of Manila. With his convoy safely at anchor in Macau and the China fleet several weeks from sailing, Cook decided to reconnoiter Manila and make observations on the port and the Spanish squadron based there. As an added motivation, rumors in Macau suggested that the annual Manila galleon was due to arrive. This ship brought up to 2 million Spanish silver dollars from Acapulco across the Pacific Ocean, stopping at Guam on its way to Manila, depositing its dollars in the Philippines. The ship then loaded trade goods from the East Indies for the return journey to New Spain. This round trip was essential to the maintenance of the Spanish Empire in the East Indies, which operated at an enormous financial loss only mitigated by the substantial subsidy from New Spain. Spanish dollars were the accepted currency across most of the East Indies, and disruption of this financial system could have profound effects on regional trade, but British sailors had nevertheless been attacking the Manila galleon since Thomas Cavendish in 1587. Leaving the heavier warships at Macau, Cook sailed on the 5th of January 1798 only with Sybil and Fox, the latter carrying a Mr. Bernard, an experienced linguist. Passing Luzon, Cook's ships encountered a small Spanish merchant vessel, which was lured towards the frigates, which were flying French tricolors. Seizing the Spanish vessel, Cook closely questioned the captain and learned that most of the Spanish squadron in Manila were undergoing extensive repairs at Cavite and were unfit to sail. Cook rewarded the captain by releasing his vessel with its cargo intact, although he did remove 3,900 silver dollars. The Spanish squadron had suffered badly in a typhoon in April 1797, and much of the damage had still not been repaired by the time Cook's small squadron arrived off Manila. Cook had taken precautions to disguise his ships as French vessels, modeling Sybil on the powerful 40-gun Forte and Fox on the smaller Prudente. Dinner on Sybil. Late in the afternoon of the 13th of January 1798, Sybil and Fox arrived in Manila Bay, slipping unchallenged past the fortress of Corregidor and then sailing across the bay on the morning of the 14th of January, anchoring between Manila and Cavite. From his vantage point, Cook could see the Spanish squadron dismasted and under repair in Cavite, the ships of the line San Pedro, Europa and Montanez, and the frigates Maria de la Cabella and Luisa in dock and unfit for action. To Cook's disappointment, he could also see the Manila galleon Marqueta being unloaded at the Cavite docks and another valuable merchant ship Carlos aground in the harbor. The Spanish had learned only shortly before Cook's arrival that the British frigate HMS Resistance under Captain Edward Pakenham was in Philippine waters and had decided to remove the valuable cargo from the treasure ship rather than risk an attack. Fox was the first British ship into the anchorage, and was consequently approached by the guard boat, whose crew came aboard. Malcolm, like Cook, spoke French fluently and with Bernard translating was able to persuade the officer in charge that the new arrivals were Forte and Prudente seeking supplies and Spanish reinforcements for commerce raiding operations. The officer offered supplies but cautioned that none of the Spanish ships would be in a position to sail until March at the earliest. Cook then joined the party on the deck of Fox, claiming to be Commodore Latour, a French officer who, unknown to the Spanish, had been killed in the action of the 9th of September 1796 off Sumatra. The Spanish officer was now completely convinced by the ruse, which had been augmented by fake French uniforms, inviting the visitor below decks. Cook then passed wine around and together they drank a series of toasts, including the downfall of England. For an hour the officers drank, Malcolm and Cook learning detailed information about the state of the defenses and squadron in the Philippines, until a second boat pulled alongside Fox containing more officers keen to greet the French arrivals. This vessel was the personal barge of the Spanish commander at Cavite, Rear Admiral Don Ignacio Maria de Lava, who was not aboard, but who sent a message via an aide in a third boat. Each time, the officers were escorted below to join the festivities, whereupon their crews were seized at gunpoint and taken below decks as prisoners of war. In Malcolm's cabin, the captured officers were informed of the situation, promised release before the British frigate sailed, and offered more wine. A crew of Fox meanwhile forced the captured Spanish sailors to strip and don the clothing. Climbing into the Spanish boats, this party rowed for the mouth of the nearby Pasig River, where they had learned that 3 heavy gunboats were moored. Taking the crews by surprise, the British boarding parties drove off the Spanish without a fight and brought all 3 boats alongside Fox. These vessels normally carried crews of 30 and were well armed, one with a 32-pounder long gun and 2 with 24-pounder long guns, each supplemented by 4 swivel guns. The harbor captain reached Fox shortly afterwards, furious at the seizure of the gunboats and demanding they be returned. Malcolm received him with a tirade of near incomprehensible French and brought him to join the other captured officers in his cabin, while the boat's crew were imprisoned below decks. Shortly afterwards, at 1600, Cook and Malcolm hosted a large dinner for their officer captives and sent food and grog to the crew. The total number of Spanish sailors on Fox now numbering approximately 200. Once the meal was finished, Cook allowed all of the captives to return to the boats and row for shore without the conditions of parole, although he retained the captured gunboats. Zamboanga. Cook led his small squadron past Corregidor on the 15th of January and turned south. 4 days later, in a storm, one of the gunboats broke its tow line and was never seen again, lost with its 12 crew. The frigate subsequently scouted Mindanao before reaching Zamboanga on the 22nd of January. There, Cook raised Spanish colors in an attempt to deceive the authorities into supplying food and water to his squadron, but Sybil grounded on a sandbank at the entrance to the port, which raised the suspicions of a guard boat sent by the governor of Zamboanga, Raimundo Español. The captain of the Spanish boat asked the British ships the names of the captains, and on receiving no answer but a volley of rifle fire, he put the town on alert. With the defenders forewarned, Cook abandoned his rowers and, after refloating Sybil the following morning, ordered a bombardment of the fort protecting the harbor. This had little effect, though later the Spanish recovered at least 450 cannonballs from different calibers, and Malcolm then attempted an amphibious landing in order to storm the landward side of the fort. The boats came under heavy fire, one smashed by a cannonball, killing 2 and wounding 4. Another boat grounded on a sandbar and became stuck, so with his force in disarray, as 250 villagers armed with lances ambushed and drove the British from the beach. Malcolm called off the operation. After exchanging shot for an hour, both frigates cut their anchor cables and retreated out of range, with 2 dead and 1 wounded on Sybil and 8 wounded on Fox, in addition to those lost in the boats. The defenders lost a single man killed and 4 wounded. With his frigates now requiring repairs, Cook withdrew half a league from Zamboanga and spent 3 days refitting the masts and rigging of the ships. Then he sailed north, scuttling the 2 remaining gunboats as he did not believe they would survive the return journey to Canton. 4 days later, on the 27th of January, the squadron halted at a village named Puli, in the north of the Sultanate of Maguindanao, to collect fresh water. On the beach, a boat party from Sybil was set upon by Luma tribesmen. 2 were killed and 9 others taken captive and dragged into the forest before rescuers could arrive. Cook complained to Sultan Kebab Sariel at Kutawato, and the captured sailors were eventually recovered, although not before Sybil and Fox had sailed for China to escort the merchant convoy back to India. Aftermath. Cook's opportunistic diversion had determined that the Spanish forces in the Philippines posed no immediate threat. Although the mission had cost 18 lives, Admiral Rainier later expressed his satisfaction with the outcome in a letter to the Admiralty. More might have been achieved with reinforcements. Historian C. Northcote Parkinson suggests that had Cook's squadron united with resistance together, they may have been able to destroy the disarmed Spanish warships at Cavite. He also notes, however, that in this scenario Pakenham would have been commanding officer, a man with considerably less imagination and guile than Cook. Historian Richard Woodman was critical of the mission, considering the operation to have no glorious outcome, and citing the failure to capture the treasure ships as its greatest shortcoming. The 1798 China fleet sailed without further incident. During the ensuing year, resistance was destroyed by an accidental explosion in July in the Banca Strait, and the majority of Rainier's forces were focused on disrupting the French occupation of Suez in the Red Sea. This diversion of British resources created gaps in the coverage in merchant shipping, and Cersei was able to send the frigatepreneurs and corvette Bruegel to Manila late in the year to join the repaired Spanish squadron. At the beginning of February 1799, this combined force sailed to Macau, taking the British defences by surprise. The British commander, Captain William Hargood, counterattacked, advancing on on the Franco-Spanish force, which retreated during the day and disappeared under cover of darkness that evening in the Wonsan archipelago. The combined squadron then dispersed and the China fleet was not attacked again until the Battle of Pulaora in 1804, at which a French squadron was again driven off in confusion. The frigates Cook had mimicked, Forte and Prudente were sent to operate independently against British trade in the Indian Ocean in early 1799. Prudente was captured by HMS Daedalus at the action of 9 February 1799 near southern Africa, and Forte was intercepted by HMS Sybil under Cook on 28 February near Balasore in Bengal. In the ensuing battle, Forte was captured but Cook mortally wounded, dying on 25 May. Citations